Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome back to another video game review. In today's review, I'm going to be talking about the Demon's Souls remake by Bluepoint. Now, we're only going to be glancing on, obviously the review portion of it, because really, aside from, visual improvements and stuff like that, it's basically the same game. The same game that you're familiar with, the same game that I'm familiar with. If you are familiar with Demon's Souls, you know what Demon's Souls is. So basically this review is going to be like, why should you get the Demon's Souls remake? Aside from the fact that it's one of the newer PlayStation 5 games that's been released. It's been very well polished, very well upgraded and everything like that, to modern day specs and everything. Yada yada yada, bing ba boo. Basically all the caveats that you want from a remake, from a shiny new remake, Demon's Souls does that. It does all of that. So if you were a fan of Demon's Souls to begin with, this will be a perfect upgrade for you. Much like with myself with Shadow of the Colossus remake that was released for the PlayStation 4. And that one was also made by Bluepoint as well. So just to glance through that part, the biggest thing that I think a lot of people are going to be asking, why would I want to get Demon's Souls? You know, I think that's the biggest question to ask. Why do I want Demon's Souls for PlayStation 5? And it's mostly for two main feedbacks. One of them being that of visual improvements. Obviously, if you played Demon's Souls for the PlayStation 3, you know the difference. And they are drastically improved. You know, some of the more unfortunate stuff that went with Demon's Souls, like for example the glow effect, that was done not so well, but keep in mind this was the PlayStation 3 literally 2 generations ago, so it makes sense for the low res feedback that Demon's Souls looks, but at the time it was considered to be probably one of the more advanced games at its time, plus this was early PlayStation 3 technically. I don't remember if it was one of the first years, but it was definitely before the halfway point of the PlayStation 3's lifespan. That much I know. So naturally graphics was not that great, but while they were perfect, they were also unpolished. Whereas the Demon's Souls remake polishes all of that, does all that really well. And especially in some cases where the rooms themselves can be very dark, even if you bright up the settings and stuff like that, they still look absolutely amazing. And all of it looks absolutely well made, all of it's well polished and everything like that. But there's one other thing that makes the Demon's Souls remake so well improved that I would default to this version rather than the PlayStation 3 version, other than the fact that, it's on the PlayStation 3 versus the PlayStation 5. And that is one small thing. And it's something that we kind of take for granted, especially coming from the PlayStation 3 and especially the PlayStation 4. And that is load times. Now obviously a lot of people have talked about this, especially since the PlayStation 5's release. The load times are absolutely insane, they are out of this world, and they are very much correct. But you don't realize it until you remember specifically one of the biggest problems with the Demon's Souls, much less the Souls franchise's biggest problems, and that is the loading screen. The loading screen is very well known, very well iconic, even to a point where even Bloodborne, during its early days, didn't have a normal loading screen that Dark Souls is known for to this day. Basically, it was just your basic Bloodborne symbol, and then that was it. But since its first release, the first year of its release, it was updated to where it gave out hints and stuff during the loading screens. And depending, you could go through 2 or 3 of those things within a loading screen. And it's painful. It is very painful to wait through those loading screens. But the Demon's Souls remake, instantaneously. No information needed whatsoever because of how quick they load. It's you're right there. It's needing to go to the Nexus, you're right there. Needing to go to one of the levels, you're right there. Want to reset a level? Done. It was so insane because I played a little bit of this before I played through Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core Reunion, and I was having a little bit of trouble, a little bit difficult time, and it was one of those things where I was playing through it, and I was like, yeah, the person that said this was easier than the original Demon Souls, can I just have a frying pan and just whack him on the back of the head? Because it ain't easier. It's not easier. It's still just as hard, if not just as dementingly hard as it usually is. So it's like, yep, it's not easier. But that was probably because back then, whenever I was playing through the PlayStation 3, I discovered a cheat to which where I basically duplicated souls, which was something that I did a lot of, to where it made it a lot more easier to get around and stuff like that. Versus the PlayStation 5 duplicate cheat, which a lot of people had discovered. So I played it 2023, this year, 2023. According to a couple of YouTube videos, they state 2023 can still work. Tried over and over and over again. Does not work. It does not work at all. It's like, nope, the duplicate just got fixed. So it's like, the PlayStation 3, at the time that I actually did beat Demon Souls, there was no support whatsoever, which means there was no guarantee that it was ever going to get patched out whatsoever. The PlayStation 5 Demon Souls, whatever glitch or things that people can cheat around and stuff like that, chances are they're going to go back and fix those things. So don't expect it to stay for very long, for if they didn't want it to be there, they'll fix it. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be as good as it is. So I was like, yeah, I can't duplicate souls, so I'll come back to this later whenever I feel a little bit more energized, and then I will try to beat it. Beat Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. So then I turned around and was like, okay, I'm just going to level grind. And I did that. I just level grind. Except for one little small thing. I got to reach to higher levels a lot quicker than I normally did. So basically, I was building my character to be more like a lance / halberd build, basically a spear attacker. And basically, I was just leveling up the attack power to where that way, if I was able to kill the enemy within 2 hits, that was accurate to where I could just go through, kill a couple enemies, and then come back to the stone and reset, do it all over again. That was my way of being able to level grind long enough to where I could hopefully do some decent damage, or at least survive against a boss long enough to where I wouldn't have to worry about it. Except, this worked out a lot more efficiently than I thought it would. Like, it was a lot more effective than I thought it ever should have been. To a point where even the Flame Lurker boss that I originally was having trouble with, that made me literally stop and just go, I'll play something else, I'll come back to this later. And whenever I got done level grinding to a certain point, I went and fought against the Fire Lurker. Died one more time to it, but then I killed it almost instantly. And I was like, now we're getting somewhere. So it was one of those things where it's like, level grinding soon became less of a problem and tedious task because of how quickly I was actually loading through the screens. In fact, if I did it a better way, and if there was a better way, there would have been an item in which where it would just spawn me right back to the previous stone, to where that way I just go right back to where I was and continue farming and everything like that. So in other words, as soon as I killed a certain enemy, I would use the item and then warp back to the stone. But really, the only other item that does that is the Nexus, and that one basically expires your souls to where you were at, to where by the time you go back to the stone, you have no souls, so then you have to carefully not die and get your souls back. So that would be not a good idea. So instead, I would kill like 4 or 5 enemies, which is the skeleton enemies, if you're familiar. The skeleton enemies, I would kill 5 or 6 of those, then walk back to the stone, reset, walk through and kill all the enemies, then walk back, reset, continue on that. Now, again, like I said, because of the fact that there's no loading times, it's not as tedious as you think. With load times, I imagine it would be just a little bit tediouser than I think most people would be able to handle. But it was just insane of how like I was able to continue going back and forth, and then I was able to enjoy the rest of the game like I wanted it to, you know? So it's one of those things where it's like, even if you're not a Souls veteran, or even like an expert when it comes to hard games or anything like that, you could just level grind in this game and then eventually get around it and stuff like that. Now, again, I'm not going to say that it's easier, because It is not easier, especially if you were doing it just playing through it. Just playing through it is still just as hard. Whereas if you took the time, level grind, level up your character to the way that you're going to level it up, whether you're a spellcaster or just an attacker or just however way you want to play it, you can level up your stats, just easy level grinding and stuff like that, and then resume back to the main game, and then all of a sudden it's somewhat of a cakewalk. Not a perfect cakewalk. You will eventually get to a point where for some reason the boss has like some sort of stupid gimmick that prevents you from making it any easier than it already is. But once you get around that particular gimmick that makes that boss irritating, the rest of the game isn't that hard at all. In fact, I would recommend most people, if they do plan on playing Demon's Souls and they're not too finicky about spoilers or anything like that, which the only major spoilers is like boss reveals and stuff like that, so depending on who you are, depends on if you don't want anything revealed or anything like that, that's up to you. But if you've already played through Demon's Souls back on the PlayStation 3, you've already been familiar with all this stuff, and you can just play through the game, you know, level up however way you plan to level up, and then you can beat through the game. Relatively easy. So ultimately, as a remake, this game would easily get a 5 out of 5. But as far as like anybody else that would be interested in wanting to play through this would be a 4 out of 5, because I'd be like, are you a fan of Dark Souls? Are you a fan of Bloodborne? Were you a fan of the original Demon's Souls? If the answer to all of that is no, I would be like hesitant of saying I would recommend this game to those people, because it is still hard. I promise you, it is still a difficult game. But if you have played through the Souls franchise and you have played through Demon's Souls, then this is an excellent upgrade to have to your collection. This is an excellent upgrade compared to the PlayStation 3 version of Demon's Souls, and I would highly recommend it. So kind of a mixed opinions, 5 out of 5 if you've played it, 4 out of 5 if you haven't played any of them and you're just not familiar with it, or you don't have a keen interest of being one challenge and stuff like that. It's completely up to you, so probably more of a 4 out of 5 technically when you think about it. But at any rate though, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later.